have another panelist, Dr. Zack Ulissi from Facebook AI. So
fundamental AI, definitely not Facebook AI.
So I'm looking forward to hear what's going on in the fundamental AI.
Okay, so I was trying to think about what I could talk about related to the science of catalysis. And I know that a lot of you have probably seen me talk about OC20. We also have seen some of those references before. So what I wanted to highlight today was just a few different examples I've seen recently where I came into the project with some bias that we were probably going to need to build another data set and make our models even better. And the models didn't work perfectly, but nonetheless, they were more useful than we expected. And that's for transition states, vibrational frequencies, free energies, and high entropy alloys, all sort of areas that we consider to be more interesting than what OC20 was originally developed for. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on the data sets and models. I just want to highlight that we renamed the Open Catalyst Project repository to Fair Chemistry because it's now more broad than just catalysis, it's also DAC and other applications. So you can find it fair-chem.github.io. We have something like 10 different large machine learning model architectures. All of it is open source, MIT licensed, do whatever you want with it. There's a bunch of tutorials and educational walkthroughs. Junk Kitchen contributed a bunch and other people from the community. There's a demo so that anyone can run our models and see how it works for catalysis or replacement. This has been used more than 100,000 times and done more than 10 million relaxations in the past year or so since it's been up. Two people I talked to, Deanne and Lars, I don't know if they're still here. Both of them have used it inside of their educational classes now. So they're actually teaching it at the undergrad and grad level, using it as a tool. That's quite cool. And maybe most importantly, all the data that we've generated is open science, open license, Creative Commons, do whatever you want. All of that is also accessible. Just click on a download, anyone can do that. Finally, we don't just release the models and the checkpoints, the models and the data, but also the trained models themselves are also released. You can go and download everything I'm going to talk about, use it for whatever you want. Hopefully it helps in your science. Okay, so that's just a little publicity for the repo if you're interested in this. These models are progressing super rapidly. So we've been running these competitions for about 5 years now. We started in 2020 with OC20 release. We're seeing a steady drop in the models. The point of this is basically just, I don't think there's one magic machine learning model. There is really steady progress. Every 3 or 4 months, we see another one. That's not something to be scared of as a catalysis researcher. That's an opportunity. Every 3 or 4 months, someone is going to release a model that works even better for your problem. And that's incredible, right? You don't even have to do anything new besides drop in another model. This is 2024. I can't tell you what the next model is, but there are models that are better than the current one, so they're coming. So we have not reached saturation yet. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of applications where I was surprised. So this one, Brooke Wander was a PhD student who was working with me when I was at Carnegie Mellon. She did an internship at FAIR last summer. She's now working with John. And when Brooke started her internship, the goal was, let's go ahead and try and make another open catalyst data set and model for transition state calculations. When I go ahead and give talks, like usually the first thing people ask is relaxations are fine, but like what about transition states and the stuff that we're actually spending time on? So the assumption was when we started this that we were going to build another data set, train another model, there would be another checkpoint, and if you wanted to do transition states, you would just use that checkpoint instead. And the way that we did this project is the very first thing Brooke did was she sat down with Mohammed, who's also here, and she asked, what is the data set that we're going to build to validate whether or not this is going to work at all? So before we add any training data, let's just go ahead and make 1,000 random transition state calculations across all sorts of crazy surfaces and just use that as a baseline to see if we come up with a model, is it going to work? And what was super cool is while we built that data set and then started to look at how the current models are doing, what we found was basically without doing any additional training, just models trained on relaxations in OC20, about 70% of the time, you just plug it into a neb and you get an answer that's within like 0.05 or 0.1 EV of the actual DFT answer. That was unbelievable. Like we thought that we were going to need a ton of additional data. We hadn't actually generated any data explicitly trying to break bonds. If you're willing to do a single point on the transition state, like no further optimization, just do a DFT calculation to get the real DFT energy, that goes up to about 84%. if you're willing to plug it into a dimer or a neb and take it the rest of the way, you can get it up to about 95%. And again, no new data, no new models. It's exactly the same checkpoints. We didn't do anything fancy. We didn't have a secret model that we were using internally. It was the same one that was available to anyone online. Another project, sort of in a similar vein, Brooke and Joe was also an intern with us last summer, also working with John now. This was a project where basically they said OC20 was trained on relaxations. It was a single descent into a local minima. So we had been evaluating them. Can we predict the relaxed energy? And one of the things that we wish we had often in catalysis, but it's very hard to get, is the full shape of the well that you're in, so that you can do a vibrational analysis and then start calculating things like free energies, which are things that usually we make really hand-wavy approximations in catalysis because they're so expensive to do. Similarly, we said before we should actually make any claims, we should build another data set to validate whether or not this is going to be working. So there's another data set that's now posted online. John and Joe and Brooke put that up. It's called OC20 Hessian. They did a bunch of vibrational calculations and calculated the Hessian. And then they also used these models that can now predict Hessians to calculate things like Gibbs free energy at individual sites or across an entire surface, including all the translational degrees of freedom, and further improve the transition state optimization calculations themselves. And so this was another case where we were getting really exciting results. If you look on the left-hand side, OC20 validation versus just machine learning. These models were working way better than expected. We did not need a ton of additional data. If you have some additional data and you're willing to fine-tune the models, you can make it even better at most of these properties. That's been a lesson that we've seen in a lot of cases. But nonetheless, these things seem to work out of the box. And this is really cool because you can start to do things like just move the adsorbate around on the surface and let it vibrate. And then you can actually say, what is the free energy as you scan it around? And that's something that would have been really hard if we were doing that explicitly with DFT. Last one. Another example of an intern that got some really exciting results. So Christian Clausen is was a PhD student, now a postdoc working with Jan Rasmussen, who many of you probably know in Denmark. Christian came to Carnegie Mellon to do a spring internship, fall, with me when I was at Carnegie Mellon. Christian and Jan have this Center for High Entropy Alloy Catalysis. A lot of people have been interested in HEAs. And so Christian came to Carnegie Mellon to try these models and say, let's see if the newest open catalyst models can help with high entropy alloys as well. This was another case where we assumed OC20 was only ordered in metallics. We were going to need another HEA data set. We would build the data set, train the models, and then see how it would work. That was just sort of our assumption and why I hadn't blindly wandered into the space of HEAs, because I was worried that we were going to need a bunch of additional data. And what he noticed was if you took the models that we already had on the left-hand side for OH binding energies, for these HEAs that he had done, and these are things like silver, iridium, palladium, platinum, ruthenium, 5-component systems that definitely were not in the original training data set or anywhere close. This already looks pretty darn good. There's a little bit of an offset, so that's a little bit suspicious. Everything seems to be a little high. If you restrict the models to only look at the near adsorbate region, basically this is the models are doing some weird things when they see an HEA slab that they've never seen before. If you tell it just focus on the adsorbate and the area around it, this gets really good. And the models are something like 0.03 EV mean absolute error on an HEA for models that were only trained on ordered in metallics. For oxygen, it's something like 0.07. This was another example where I just went into that project assuming that we were going to need more data and more models. And the models out of the box had already learned something fundamental about how metals were interacting and what these sites would look like. And this was also quite surprising. So that was sort of a whirlwind tour and 3 just really similar projects in my mind of situations where these models are more useful than we already think. And I'm highlighting those because in this idea of what is missing for the science, I actually think there's less missing than we think. And a lot of the models that have been developed are already more useful than we expect. And the only thing limited is our creativity and how we use them now, which is a really cool situation. So other things that are coming, We're trying to move beyond catalysis. That's why there's a fair chemistry name. Generative models, we've had a sequence of models and model releases. Feel free to chat with me afterwards. There's more data sets and models coming. Mohammed has a poster on the experimental efforts, so go and chat with him after if you're interested in this. So thanks so much. Lots of people have contributed, and we're hiring for postdocs and interns.